picture this. The room goes silent and you're standing at the front and you're the one that everyone's looking to for guidance, for decisions, for strength. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there's something that twists. And it's not just your nerves, it's not just the pressure. It's this quiet gnawing voice that says, what do you think you're actually doing? Like, you're not enough. And they're gonna see right through you, right? And so you straighten, you posture, you tighten your jaw, you push down that feeling, and you move forward. Because that's what leaders do, right? They push. They push through all the time. And they pretend that they're not scared. They pretend that they're not doubting. And they pretend that they're not carrying the weight of this heavy weight of shame that they can't name, but they can't shake it either. But here's the truth that most leadership books won't tell you, perhaps, and that is that you can't outrun shame. You can maybe mask it, you can dress it up, you can bury it under achievements and under accolades, but you can't lead from shame. And that's because shame poisons everything that it touches, and leadership is no exception. Shame, in essence, turns leadership into a performance, and it turns influence into control. Shame turns authority into one's armor. And sooner or later, the cracks start to show. But here's what shame actually does to leadership. You see, shame isn't just a feeling, it's a filter, a distorted lens through which you see yourself and through which you see others and the world around you. And when you're leading through shame, you don't just doubt yourself, you doubt everyone else around you as well. And so you start to micromanage, right? Because letting go feels too risky. And you avoid hard conversations because confrontation feels so much like exposure. And you compensate with perfectionism because failure feels fatal. And so you hide behind your title because visibility feels dangerous. And I mean, you might get temporary results through all this, and you might also build something that looks successful, at least from the outside. But in reality, on the inside, it's fragile, it's hollow, it's unsustainable. Because it's not real leadership. It's more of a survival strategy that's just it's dressed up like leadership's clothes. But the world does not need more leaders who are gifted at pretending. The world doesn't need more leaders who perform strength while they're secretly drowning in their shame. What the world needs is more leaders who are whole, leaders who have done the invisible and grueling and necessary work of internal healing, leaders who have faced their own shame and survived it, leaders who have learned not to lead from their wounds, but from their wholeness. And here's the paradox. The very thing that you're afraid of that will make you weak is, and I mean, that's your shame. This is actually what makes you strong when you're willing to face it. But this is what shame sounds like to a leader. If shame had a voice in leadership, it would say things like, you have to prove yourself every day, right? Or you can't show weakness. Or if they really knew you, they wouldn't respect you then, right? Or you're only as good as your last win. Have you heard that? Or don't let them see you sweat, like, ever. And so you hustle, you perform, you outwork, you outlast. But underneath the grind, there's this fear. And it's not a good foundation at all. Because if you believe that you're only as valuable as your achievements, you'll live in terror of failing. And you won't believe your worth. You'll believe your worth actually hinges on being perfect, and thus you'll suffocate under the pressure. You'll lead like a house that's built on sand, which looks impressive perhaps at first glance, but is vulnerable in every storm. But stick around, because in just a couple moments, I want to talk about the single most important shift that you have to make if you want to move from shame-driven leadership to a leadership that's rooted in integrity and in wholeness. And it's not what you think, I think, but it's, I think, the foundation for everything else that we build on. But here's what leadership that's built on healing could look like. You see, leadership that's built on healing looks vastly different. It's not performative. It's presence, right? It's not one that tries to prove itself, but it's about being present in the moment. It's not about control as much as it is about extending trust. We see leaders who have faced their shame, they lead differently. They can have hard conversations without defensiveness. And they can delegate without fear of being outshone themselves. And they can celebrate others without feeling diminished. And they can admit mistakes without crumbling under the weight of their failure, perceived. Because their identity isn't tangled up in outcomes. It's because their worth is not tethered to external approval. See, they don't need to use leadership to feel worthy. They bring their worth to the leadership, and that changes everything. So, if you're leading from shame, you're not just hurting yourself. You're actually hurting also the very people who trust you and who are following you, because shame doesn't stay hidden. Shame leaks out. It leaks into the culture that you build. It leaks into the expectations that you set. It leaks into the way that you treat the people that you're leading. And when shame drives leadership, it creates these organizations that they're high performing perhaps, but they also have high burnout. And they may seem disciplined, but emotionally they're brittle. They may seem successful, but relationally they're quite toxic. It creates leaders who are, I guess, hypercritical of others, because they're hypercritical of themselves in the first place. They're quick to punish failure, but because they're terrified of their own failures. They're obsessed with appearances because they're terrified that they'll be found out at some point. And slowly and quietly, the trust begins to erode, the loyalty fades, the culture begins to harden, because people can feel when they're being led by fear instead of being led by wholeness. You see, you can't build something that's life-giving when you're leading from a place of self-loathing. You can't inspire if you're leading from insecurity, and you can't empower if you're afraid of losing control. See, leadership is an extension, if you will, of oneself. And if that self is fractured, the leadership will be as well. I once heard of this leader who described his early leadership style in the following way. He said something like, I always was 3 seconds from snapping, he said. He was successful, he was respected, he was admired even, but underneath the awards and the recognition, he was carrying this crushing weight of shame. He couldn't take criticism because every critique felt like confirmation that he was a fraud. And he couldn't delegate because trusting others felt like risking exposure for him. He couldn't rest because slowing down would leave too much space for self-doubt to creep in. And it wasn't until he actually faced his own shame, not with more hustling, but with healing. That's when things began to change for him. But let me talk a little bit about why you can't outperform shame. See, you can't outperform your shame. You can't outwork it. You can't out-achieve your shame. And you can't outsmart it. Because shame is not about what you do as much as it's about what you believe. It's the deep, often unspoken belief that you are not enough, that you are broken, that you are unworthy. And no amount of external validation can ever fix an internal wound. So you could have all the awards and all the accolades and all the approval in this world, and you could still feel empty. Because if you don't believe that you're worthy, like without this success, well, you'll never believe that you're worthy with the success. See, shame is this black hole. It devours whatever you throw at it, right? And the only way out isn't through more doing per se. It's through healing, your personal healing. Let's talk about what moving from hiding to honesty looks like. You see, what shame does as a leader is it starts to diminish. But one thing can counter that, and that's honesty. I'm not talking about performative vulnerability or curated authenticity, but real honesty, the kind that admits freely at saying, I feel scared, or I don't have all the answers, or I mess up too, or I struggle with worthiness. This is a kind of story that stops one's humanity from diminishing in leadership. Because here's the paradox that I have you consider. The more you're hiding, the weaker you become. The more you're willing to admit your weakness, the stronger you grow. See, honesty is where real leadership actually begins, because honesty breaks this cycle that shame initiates. Shame thrives in secrecy. It withers in the light of truth, though. And when you stop hiding, you stop feeding the shame that's been starving your leadership. And then consider what it looks like to move from performing to being present. This is the second shift that is really critical, and that's moving from performing to being present. And so leaders trapped in the shame, they perform, they play roles, they manage impressions, and they hustle for people's approval. Leaders who have healed from their shame, they lead from being present. They aren't trying to be something that they're not. They are something. They show up as themselves, and they feel grounded and whole and human. See, presence is what people are really craving from their leaders, even if they can't name that thing. They don't want perfection. They want presence, right? They don't want untouchability. They want someone who's relatable. And they don't want people who perform as much as they want people who are able to connect. And presence can't be faked. It can't be manufactured. It can only be cultivated by doing the slow, necessary work of healing. So if this is resonating with you, stick with me just a little longer, because in just a moment I'm going to break down the 3 essential practices that transform leaders from shame-driven performers to grounded forces for real change in this world. And they're not what most leadership programs will teach. But let's talk about healing shame. See, healing shame isn't about mastering new tricks. It's about cultivating deeper tools. And there are 3 practices I believe that every shame-healed person and leader must grow into. Number 1, self-compassion over self-criticism. See, shame is fueled by self-criticism. It says things like, you're not good enough, right? Or you're a failure, or you're a fraud, you're a disappointment. Now, you may think beating yourself keeps you sharp, keeps you driven, keeps you in reality. But what it actually does is it keeps you stuck. See, self-criticism traps you in this cycle of fear and perfectionism, where you're never satisfied, you're never safe, you never are enough. Whereas self-compassion breaks the cycle. It says things like, you made a mistake, but you are not a mistake. You fell short, yes, but you're still worthy. Or you're growing, and growth is messy. See, self-compassion does not make you lazy. It makes you resilient. And leaders who practice self-compassion, well, they tend to recover faster from their failures, and they model grace to their teams, because how you treat yourself, that's inevitably how you also shape and treat others as well. And you can't lead them from a place that you're not in. You can't lead with grace if you're led by self-hatred. You can't cultivate trust if you're living in fear of your own flaws. Healing really begins when you replace self-criticism with self-compassion. Second practice is connection over control. See, when shame runs the show, control feels like safety. You grip harder, you hold tighter, you micromanage and you manipulate and you dominate. But control is a poor substitute for connection. Control alienates. It alienates connection, but connection builds trust. Leaders driven by shame try to control their teams, whereas leaders driven by healing connect with their teams. Connection requires vulnerability, in essence. It requires listening more than talking, and understanding more than commanding. It requires trusting more than managing. And it requires seeing people not as tools or threats, but as fellow humans. And here's the truth. The tighter that you're gripping, the more you're losing. The more you connect, though, the more you're able to actually lead. Connection, let me tell you, is messy. It's unpredictable, it's risky, but it's also where real leadership lives. And then the third practice is integrity over your image. When you're lost in shame, image matters far more than integrity. Like, it's critical. You think, how do I look? How am I being perceived? Do they approve of me? Or am I being admired? And so you perform goodness rather than living a good experience. You polish your appearance rather than cultivating authentic, genuine presence. But real leadership isn't about managing optics. It's about living in alignment, right? And my definition of integrity is when your inside values match your outside actions. It means that your values aren't just posters on a wall, for example, but they're lived in small and hidden moments. It means you're doing what's right, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. Integrity, it makes your leadership solid. Whereas focusing on your image makes it slippery. Integrity builds trust in your leadership, but image cultivates suspicion. Integrity lasts a long time, whereas image fades. And if you want to lead in a way that outlasts, like seasons and scandals and storms, choose integrity over image every time. But there's a cost to avoiding this kind of work. You see, you can avoid this work if you want, but you can keep pushing shame aside, and you can keep pretending that it's not there. You can keep performing and managing and polishing. But here's the cost. The cost is this. You'll stay exhausted and you'll keep feeling hollow. And you'll wonder why success doesn't really feel like success after you worked so hard for it. Worse still is you'll build things that crumble over time under the pressure. You'll create teams that don't trust you. And you'll cultivate cultures that replicate your own hidden fears and insecurities. And the cost isn't just personal, it's actually relational, it's organizational, it's generational. You see, shame doesn't just break leaders, it actually also breaks communities. But here's an invitation I'd offer you, because there is another path, and that is the slow, honest, courageous path of healing. The path where leadership is not armor, it's an offering. Where authority isn't domination as much as it is stewardship. Where your influence is not a performance, but it's your presence. See, the path where you stop leading to prove something and start leading because you have something to give is where that shift happens. It touches your sense of wholeness and your sense of integrity and your courage and your groundedness. The very things that shame told you you'd never have are in reality waiting on the other side of your healing. So, maybe you don't have to keep leading from shame, right? Maybe you don't have to keep pretending. Maybe you don't have to keep performing or carrying this crushing weight of proving your worth. Perhaps you can just lay it down and choose a different way. I mean, it's possible for you to lead, not from your wounds, but from your wholeness. And not from fear as much as from your courage. And not from your shame, but from this sense of integrity. And when you do that, everything begins to shift. You see, it doesn't change instantly or easily or profoundly, because healed leaders heal cultures. Healed leaders create spaces for safety. Healed leaders, they give permission to others to also be whole as well. The leadership that you're longing for doesn't start on the outside as much as it starts on the inside. And that starts with your own personal healing. It starts with you. Now, if this conversation today spoke to you, I want to encourage you to check out a past episode I uploaded called The Lie That Ruins Men and You're Only Worth What You Can Get. Because this podcast dives deeper into the hidden ways that we've hijacked our worth and how to reclaim that with integrity and with intimacy. And if that isn't enough, and you're hungry for more still, well, stay tuned, because I'm building spaces where leaders are ready, who don't want performance anymore, but want to lead from a deeper place of wholeness. So stay tuned, but in the meantime, thank you for watching this and thinking carefully with me. I'd love to hear your comments down below. See you in the next episode.